Hi, ladies and gentlemen. He is the promoter, my friend Bernie Vukovic. I actually brought him over, but let's face it, he and I would do just about anything. Ty Ballou's already done some damage to that delicious chili dog. Ty Ballou, of course, PLD Sports, Bernie Vukovic. It's our tribute to Muhammad Ali. And yeah, I was in my gym early this morning at the Pratte gym about 2 a.m. doing a tribute. We spent a couple of hours on KDK, people talking about the champ. And I'm going to begin with Ty Ballou because it's all about branding, and no one had a better brand than the greatest. You could go anywhere in the world, and if you said the greatest, more times than not, people knew you were talking about Muhammad Ali.
Well, he was the greatest. I grew up in Chicago, and there was nothing better than watching. I was actually a Joe Frazier fan. Loved Ali's, but Ali Frazier was great, and he really kind of. Muhammad really did set the bar. He was a great promoter, but you know what? You got to back it up, and I don't think anybody backed it up as well as Muhammad Ali. So he created the brand. He created people around him like Joe Frazier, like Howard Cosell, which was a great foil for him. And to me, that's what. Well, I mean, that's when boxing was absolutely at its pinnacle. So whether it's Zaire, whether it was I don't know, it was a Madison Square Garden, but there was no better promoter, and he did an absolutely great job. And it was outside the ring too. I mean, he was a great promoter inside the ring, but what he did outside and certainly with the military and so on, really set himself apart. So, huge fan. Sad day, 74. I know his health is poor, but really just an immense fan of Muhammad Ali.
We're going to talk about the boxing in just a moment, but I also want to talk about Howard Cosell, who I have always been a huge fan of. And Howard Cosell was one of the first to actually give him the love and to call him Muhammad Ali when others didn't. And those who did actually paid the price. Some actually got roughed up a little bit, their cars got burned up a little bit, and they got treated unfairly because a lot of folks didn't like the fact that he went from the Christian name and Cassius Clay to the name, of course, that he took and adopted in the Muslim faith, and that being Muhammad Ali. But one thing's for sure, when it came to civil rights, he stood up. Obviously, the whole issue as far as not stepping up and entering the military caused a lot of problems, took 3 of the best years of his career away from him, millions of dollars, but he stayed the course. And I think now as we look back on that turbulent time in our country, we really have to wonder who was right, and you have to even think about how courageous Muhammad Ali was. I have been a fan of his since I've been a teenager. I will always love the man of what he stood for, but for those of us like Bernie who love the sport of boxing, make no mistake about it, there was a reason they called him the greatest. And from the time he won at 19 the Olympic gold medal in Rome as a light heavyweight, and then of course at 21 years of age when he shocked the world and beat the Bear Sonny Liston, yes, ladies and gentlemen, Muhammad Ali's reputation was cast in stone. And until his last fight against Larry Holmes, that just ugly, ugly fight, he had a remarkable career. Hated to see the way he went out, but I will never forget the way he thrived in the sport of boxing. Right?
Like Ty, I wasn't a big fan of Ali early on. I was a Floyd Patterson fan.
Yeah.
And
I never knew that.
And a Sonny Liston fan.
Right.
Mostly because Sonny Liston was always kept away from a title fight because of his personal background and the fact that in those days the sport was really controlled by the underworld, and they had their champions, and that's who was going to be champion. And if you weren't in their, I guess if you good graces, or if you weren't part of their entourage, you weren't going to fight for the title. So I always liked Liston, and when he got whipped by Ali, I was so disappointed. And I didn't recognize how good Ali was in those days because you didn't see the fight live unless you were there. It was on radio. I listened to it on the radio. I hate to say, but the first time he fought Liston, I was at my grandfather's funeral, sitting in the car.
Listen to the fight.
Well, my grandfather wouldn't have known.
Your mom knew.
She did, my dad knew, but in any event, I listened to that fight in the car. And began to realize that this must be a pretty good fighter. And you know, the thing about Liston was he was always thought to be such a big guy. And what they would do with him was they would put towels underneath his robe so that when he came out from the dressing room, he looked much bigger than what he was a big guy, but he wasn't as big as they made him out to be. Ali actually turned out to be a bigger physical specimen, taller and a little bit broader, although lighter in weight than Liston was. People didn't know that. And they began to see all those things after he won the heavyweight title.
One thing I don't think a lot of people realize, and I talked about this on the radio, those 3 years, 67, 68, 69, that were stripped from him, as was the title, because it was, well, his idea that he didn't believe that it was right to go to Vietnam and to kill the Viet Cong. Those were the prime years of his career. And then all of a sudden he gets his license back, he's thrust back into the ring. October of 70, a good heavyweight, Jerry Corey, he stops in 3. Oscar Bonavena, 2 months later, he knocks down 3 times, 3 knockdown rule in effect, Madison Square Garden, he wins. And then all the hype, all the touring, and all of the road show, if you will, to get people in the seats to Madison Square Garden for the fight of the century, a true fight of the century, against Joe Frazier, in which he loses in 15 rounds, 2 undefeated former heavyweight champions in the ring, first and only time. He had a whirlwind, and then he was fighting every few months, and he fought way too long. But I just wish sometimes we could have seen what he would have been like if he would have never had to stop fighting.
Well, that's that school of thought. And of course, on the other hand, there are fighters throughout the course of the sport, history of the sport, that did take a lot of time off between fights. And today, it's not unusual to see a fighter go into a ring after having been inactive for as long as a year, sometimes even a little bit longer, and do pretty well. It's probably not the best thing in the world to do. It'd be just like you in your profession. You would lose your edge if you didn't do what you do every day, or at least as frequently as you do.
Right.
But he probably did give up the best years of his life, because that was a 3-year hiatus where he was at his peak. And then to come back, and almost immediately after those 2 fights you mentioned, Bonavena and Corey, gets in with Joe Frazier.
Oh.
And that trilogy were probably the 3 fights that took a lot out of both of those guys.
Right.
They were deep, especially after the Thrill in Manila time.
Yeah.
He was Frazier was never the same after that, nor was Ali. They gave each other the best they had, and they were never the same.
I agree too. I mean, it's just those fights were, I mean, they're etched. I mean, I was watching TV today, and I can just remember going back, whatever, 30 or 40 years of those fights. It was a beating. Those guys toe to toe. And the reason, again, it's they fought. I mean, the paydays. You're right. These guys take a year off, year and a half off. I mean, Ali was making. They weren't making the paydays. I mean, and then, of course, over. I don't know exactly when Don King came in. I don't know if that was in the late '60s or '70s. I know that when he came in there too, and he was controlling that. And these guys needed that payday, and there wasn't quite the marketing. There wasn't all the endorsements and so on. And yeah, after those 3 fights, the beating those 2 guys took, it was.
I'll tell you this way, I remember the most about that first fight. They both got guaranteed $2.5 million.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh my, back up the Brinks truck. And
Yeah.
then when he fights Foreman in Kinshasa's Zaire years later, $5 million each. George Foreman obviously didn't fare as well. There were some issues, how much he actually got out of the country with. But the thing that I love the most about George Foreman, not Joe Frazier, and all these guys that you mentioned, the respect that they have for Muhammad Ali. They were all talking about it today, young and old alike. Not just people like people we've been discussing, like George Foreman and such, but also the great Floyd Mayweather and Oscar De La Hoya and others, just all wanting to talk about Muhammad Ali, Mike Tyson. I want to kind of finish on just a couple more of his great moments in the ring. And I have to believe, rope a dope or not, meaning leaning on the rope, tiring out Foreman, as boring as it seemed, that was a monumental night for boxing and for him when he regained the championship.
Well, that's I heard a story once about that fight where Foreman was beating up on Ali through a lot. He had him on the ropes, and that was, of course, the genesis of the rope a dope.
Right.
And he really pounded Ali a lot in that fight. And Ali asked him during the fight, he said, "George, is that all you got?" And George said, "Pretty much." Pretty much. He recounted that story today on the radio. They were interviewing him. But it's interesting how you bring up the paydays, and Rob talks about the amounts. I think Ali made $57 million in his career.
That was
57 million. That was a different time. It was
Right,
50
right.
years ago. In contrast, Mayweather in the last fight made 300 million.
The last fight.
last fight.
So that's right. So you're gonna take maybe 12 to 24 months off, right, and
Yeah.
enjoy that money. Right.
Yeah.
So.
Last thing, Bernie Bukovic, Ty Ballou, looking and remembering the legend of Muhammad Ali here at the Brighton Hot Dog Shop. Thanks again to the Papa family for letting us hang out and spend a little time here tonight. As far as his style, and I talked about it on the radio today, but no one can break it down better than you. What made him so good? He was a middleweight speed in a heavyweight body at all times, able to do things that mere mortals, especially heavyweights, had never done before. But explain to the audience what made him exceptionally good, especially when it comes to being a heavyweight with that kind of speed.
Well, his footwork was unequal. Most people don't recognize that to be a good defensive fighter, you have to have good footwork. It's not always just what you do with your hands. Getting away from the opponent is an important thing. So his footwork was unequal. Secondly, he did things a lot different than the average fighter. If you take a look at some of his fights on YouTube, one of the things they teach you is never to move your head back when the guy is throwing a punch at you. He would do that. He would lean back all the time.
With his hands down.
And with his hands down. That's the other thing that he did was fight with his hands down, which obviously would leave himself open for a counterpunch. The problem is he had such a long reach. I think his reach was something like the way they measured in those days was 81 inches. So everybody else was 3, 4, 5 inches away from the end of his punches, and they couldn't get to him. So those 4 things, the footwork, the way he moved his head, keeping his hands down, and the arm length, the way he fought, the way he boxed. He was a very good boxer for a heavyweight. His knockout ratio was only about 51%, whereas a guy like Ernie Shavers, you remember when he fought Shavers, Ernie Shavers had a 76% knockout ratio. So Ali could get in there with those big-time bangers and knock them out because of the speed of his combinations.
Well, no, you're absolutely spot on. And I'll go back to my friend Joe Frazier. It's amazing that Frazier, because Frazier was this little guy with these little arms, but for him to beat Ali, I mean, it's sad. It's kind of it's a chapter that's closed. I mean, obviously he wasn't good, in great health, but just I don't know if we'll ever see it again. It was such remarkable. It was just kind of a beautiful time, and I don't know. It was a great fighter, and I'm glad that the other fighters out there are giving him his due and the accolades today.
Roy Jones paid him a big tribute today. He said, had it not been for Ali, Ali was Roy Jones' dad's idol. And obviously, you're going to listen to what your dad says all your career. And he wanted to emulate the lifestyle and the boxing style of Ali because it was his dad's idol.
That worked out pretty well, right?
It worked out pretty well.
It worked out
good.
Another legend.
Bernie Hooker's Todd blew a couple legends in my mind into the 9 children of Muhammad Ali. Be proud, your dad was pretty special. Good night from the Brighton Hot Dog Shop.